A girl is betrayed and rushes into a marriage with a stranger only to discover he's a billionaire. Hi, my beautiful story family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Yesterday was an incredibly special day. It was my birthday. I celebrated in grand style, but I missed you all so much. Your beautiful birthday wishes made my day unforgettable, and I'm so grateful to have you as my family. I truly wish I could have shared my birthday cake with each and every one of you. Just imagine us all celebrating together. It would have been amazing. Before we dive into today's story, tell me, how did you like the last one? If you enjoyed it, drop a yes in the comments below. Now, let's get started. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled between a fashion magazine and bills, like a viper hiding among garden flowers. Lilibet Davies sat in her home office, surrounded by the fruits of her successful art career. Paintings that had earned her recognition in Manhattan's competitive art scene, awards that gleamed on mahogany shelves, and the subtle luxury that came with being one of New York's rising stars in contemporary art. None of it mattered now. Her trembling fingers traced the gold-embossed letters on the cream-colored envelope. She didn't need to open it. The return address told her everything. James Winchester and Catherine Monroe cordially invited her to celebrate their union. James, her fiancé of 3 years. Catherine, her best friend since college. The betrayal was complete. Lilibet's gaze drifted to the painting that hung opposite her desk, the one she'd been working on for their wedding. It was meant to be a surprise, a celebration of their love story, James proposing in Central Park. The way the autumn leaves had danced around them, how perfect everything had seemed. Now, the canvas mocked her with its half-finished beauty, much like their relationship, incomplete and destined to remain that way. She rose from her ergonomic chair, her Louboutins clicking against the hardwood floors as she walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Upper East Side apartment. The city sprawled before her, a maze of glass and steel that had witnessed countless dreams rise and fall. Somewhere out there, in one of those towering buildings, James was probably with Catherine, planning their perfect day. The memory of last week's dinner party crashed over her like a tidal wave. They'd all been there, James, Catherine, their mutual friends. Had everyone known? Had they all been laughing behind her back, watching her plan a wedding that would never happen? Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from concerned friends probably. The news must have spread through their social circle like wildfire. Lilibet Davies, the artistic prodigy, left for her best friend. It would be the scandal of the season. "Ms. Davies?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The gallery called. They need your decision on the upcoming exhibition's layout." "Cancel everything," Lilibet replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks." "But Ms. Davies, the Morrison opening—" "Everything, Emma. Cancel it all." She turned back to her desk, picking up the invitation with newfound resolve. The paper crumpled in her grip before she tossed it into the wastepaper basket. 3 years of memories followed. Photos, gifts, letters, all the physical remnants of a love that had been built on lies. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. "James." Subject, "We need to talk." Lilibet's finger hovered over the trackpad, tempted to open it, to read whatever excuse he'd crafted. Instead, she opened a new tab and navigated to the airline's website. She needed to escape, to go somewhere where the whispers couldn't reach her, where pitying glances wouldn't follow her every move. Las Vegas appeared in the search results, the city of impulse decisions and fresh starts. Perfect. She booked the first available flight, then moved to her bedroom to pack. The massive walk-in closet that had once brought her joy now felt suffocating. Designer dresses hung like ghosts of parties past, each one holding memories of nights out with James and Catherine. The betrayal from her best friend cut deeper than James's infidelity. They'd been inseparable since their first day at Parsons School of Design. Catherine had been there through everything: Lilibet's first gallery showing, her parents' divorce, countless late nights spent discussing dreams and fears over bottles of wine. How long had it been going on? How many times had Catherine consoled her over relationship troubles with James, all while knowing she was the cause? The questions burned in Lilibet's mind as she threw clothes into her Louis Vuitton suitcase. Her phone rang again. Catherine's face appeared on the screen, a photo from their trip to Paris last summer. They'd spent a week exploring art galleries and vintage shops, sharing secrets and dreams. Had she been sleeping with James then? Had they been laughing at her naivety? Lilibet declined the call and blocked the number. The bedroom wall still held photographs from happier times. She and James at the Met Gala, Catherine's arm around her at her last birthday celebration, the three of them skiing in Aspen. Each image now revealed subtle signs she'd missed. The way James leaned slightly toward Catherine in group photos, the secretive glances they shared, the gradually increasing distance between her and James that she'd attributed to his busy schedule at the investment firm. She'd been such a fool. A knock at her door made her freeze. Through the peephole, she saw James standing in the hallway, still in his business suit, looking disheveled. His presence sparked not longing, but anger, pure white-hot rage that burned away the last of her tears. "Lilibet, please," his voice came through the door. "Let me explain." She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, remembering all the times he'd come home late, claiming to be working on important deals. Had he been with Catherine those nights? Had they met in secret while she waited up for him, believing in his devotion? "There's nothing to explain," she called back, her voice ice-cold. "The invitation said it all. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he pleaded. "We were going to tell you properly. Catherine and I... It just happened." Lilibet laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty apartment. "Things like this don't just happen, James. You made choices. Both of you did. Every lie, every secret meeting, every betrayal was a choice. I never meant to hurt you. That's the problem, isn't it? You never meant to do anything. You just let it happen, let me believe in a future that you were actively destroying. Get out, James. Go plan your wedding. I'm sure Catherine's waiting." His silence confirmed her suspicion. Of course Catherine was waiting, probably in his car, parked outside the building. "I loved you, Lilibet. Part of me still does." "No, you loved the idea of me. The successful artist, the perfect fiancé who never questioned your late nights or sudden business trips. Go away, James. You've lost the right to any explanation from me." She heard him sigh. Then his footsteps retreated down the hallway. Only when the elevator dinged did she allow herself to breathe again. Her laptop pinged with another email notification, the airline confirmation. In 6 hours, she'd be on a plane to Las Vegas, leaving behind the wreckage of her life in New York. Lilibet moved through her apartment with purpose now, gathering essentials and transferring funds to ensure she'd have enough for an extended stay. The city that had once felt like home now seemed to close in around her, every street corner holding memories she needed to escape. She called her gallery manager, leaving detailed instructions for the upcoming exhibitions. Her art would go on, even if her personal life had imploded. She'd built her career from nothing, and no betrayal could take that away from her. As sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of orange and pink, Lilibet took one last look at her apartment. The half-finished wedding painting caught her eye again. With deliberate steps, she walked to it, picked up a palette knife, and scraped through the canvas, destroying the image of a love that had never been real. The doorman helped her with her luggage, tactfully pretending not to notice her red-rimmed eyes. "Will you be gone long, Miss Davies?" "I don't know, Robert," she replied honestly. "Sometimes you need to leave everything behind to find yourself again." As her taxi navigated through Manhattan traffic toward JFK, Lilibet blocked every number except her parents and assistant. She deactivated her social media accounts and turned off email notifications. The world she'd carefully built over the past 3 years had crumbled, but from its ashes, something new would rise. The wedding invitation she'd left in her wastepaper basket felt like a symbol now, not of her loss, but of her liberation. James and Catherine had unknowingly given her the push she needed to break free from the carefully constructed cage of expectations and social obligations that had slowly been suffocating her. Looking out at the city lights blurring past her window, Lilibet felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Somewhere between the crushing pain of betrayal and the burning need to escape, a small spark of excitement had ignited. She was free now, free from lies, free from pretense, free from a future that would have been built on deception. Las Vegas awaited, with its promises of reinvention and new beginnings. She had no idea what she would find there, but anything had to be better than staying here, drowning in memories of what could have been. As her taxi pulled up to the departures terminal, Lilibet straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. They say living well is the best revenge. She intended to do more than live well. She intended to thrive. Little did she know that fate had already set in motion a chain of events that would lead her to a love story greater than anything she could have imagined. In less than 24 hours, she would meet a man who would change her life forever. But for now, all she knew was that she needed to get as far away from New York as possible. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for Lilibet Davies, plans that would make her current pain seem like a necessary step toward an extraordinary destiny. Chapter 2. Fate's Hand. The Las Vegas lights assaulted Lilibet's senses as her taxi wound its way down the strip. Each neon sign seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a symphony of artificial stars competing with the real ones hidden behind the city's perpetual glow. She'd chosen the Bellagio not for its opulence, but for its reputation as a haven for those seeking anonymity among luxury. The grand lobby stretched before her, a testament to excess and escapism. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, throwing rainbow patterns across marble floors that had witnessed countless stories like hers, though perhaps not quite like hers. She was, after all, Lilibet Davies, the artist whose last exhibition had sold out in hours. Now she was just another soul seeking solace in Sin City. "Welcome to the Bellagio, Miss Davies," the receptionist smiled, her practiced warmth never reaching her eyes. "We've upgraded you to one of our premium suites." Lilibet accepted the key card with a murmured thanks. The suite would be wasted on her. She hadn't come to Vegas for luxury. She'd come to lose herself, to forget the image of that wedding invitation that seemed burned into her retinas. The elevator carried her to the 28th floor, each ascending floor putting more distance between her and her old life. Her phone had been buzzing constantly during the flight. Messages from gallery owners, friends, even her mother, all demanding explanations she wasn't ready to give. The suite was exactly what she'd expected: tasteful elegance wrapped in beige and gold, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city's glittering expanse. She dropped her bags by the door and headed straight for the minibar. If ever there was a time for overpriced hotel alcohol, this was it. 3 hours later, having changed into a black cocktail dress that made her feel more like herself, Lilibet made her way to the hotel bar. The Hyde Lounge was buzzing with the kind of energy that only Las Vegas could generate, a mixture of desperation, hope, and reckless abandon. She chose a seat at the bar, away from the crowds. The bartender approached with practiced efficiency, his name tag reading Marcus. "Manhattan, please," she ordered, appreciating the irony. "Make it double." "Running from something or celebrating?" Marcus asked as he prepared her drink. "Is there a third option?" She managed a weak smile. "In Vegas? Those are usually the only two categories we get." The Manhattan appeared before her, garnished with a perfect cherry. She took a sip, letting the familiar burn of quality bourbon ground her in the present moment. Around her, the bar hummed with conversations in various languages, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or clinking of glasses. That's when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze. Not the casual glances she was used to receiving, but something more intense, more deliberate. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd until her eyes locked with his. He sat at a corner table, alone, despite the crowd swirling around him. Tall, impossibly handsome, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the bar's dim lighting and eyes that held secrets she found herself wanting to uncover. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but it was his presence, rather than his clothes, that commanded attention. Their eye contact held for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then he stood, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of a predator. Every step brought him closer, and Lilibet felt her pulse quicken. Part of her wanted to flee. She wasn't ready for this, for him, for whatever this moment might become. But a stronger part, the part that had booked that flight to Vegas, kept her rooted to her bar stool. This seat taken. His voice was deep, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Old money mixed with something rawer, more dangerous. "Depends on who's asking," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to breathtaking. "Lennox Orion," he offered, sliding onto the bar stool next to her. "And you look like you're running from something." The accuracy of his observation startled a laugh from her. "Or towards something," she countered, taking another sip of her Manhattan. "Want to get married?" She meant it as a joke, a bitter jab at her own situation, but the words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. His eyes darkened as he studied her face, and she felt exposed, as if he could see every wound James and Catherine had inflicted. "Yes," he answered simply. Lilibet nearly choked on her drink. "I was joking," she managed, though something in her chest tightened at his response. "Were you?" Lennox signaled the bartender, ordering a scotch neat with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Because I wasn't. You can't be serious." She turned to face him fully now, taking in the sharp lines of his jaw, the subtle signs of power and wealth that she'd been trained since childhood to recognize. "You don't even know my name." "Then tell me," he challenged, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tell me everything." And somehow, in that moment, surrounded by the chaos of a Vegas bar, Lilibet found herself wanting to do just that. There was something about Lennox Orion that made her want to shed her carefully constructed walls, to be real in a way she hadn't been with anyone in years, not even James. "Lilibet Davies," she offered, watching recognition flicker across his face. Her name carried weight in certain circles, though clearly not as much as his did, judging by the way the staff hovered attentively nearby. "The artist," he nodded. "I saw your exhibition at the Gagosian last fall, your use of light and shadow. It was extraordinary." The compliment, delivered with genuine appreciation rather than social obligation, warmed something inside her. "You know art?" "I know beauty," he corrected, his gaze intensifying, "in all its forms." The conversation flowed as easily as the drinks, hours dissolving into a bubble of shared confidences and unexpected connections. Lennox spoke of his own escape from family expectations, arranged marriages, and the suffocating weight of legacy. She told him about James and Catherine, the words spilling out without the sting she'd expected. "They did you a favor," Lennox said finally, his hand finding hers on the bar. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what we're really meant to have." His touch sent electricity through her veins, awakening parts of her she thought had died with James's betrayal. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane. You don't marry strangers in Vegas, no matter how compelling they might be. But rationality had led her to James, to 3 years of lies and betrayal. I meant what I said earlier, Lennox continued, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. About marriage. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you want to marry a stranger? Because you're not a stranger, he replied with a certainty that shook her. I've known you my whole life. I just didn't know it was you I was waiting for. The words should have sounded cheesy, practiced, but coming from him they held a raw truth that resonated with something deep inside her. She looked into his eyes and saw not the carefully polished facade of James's affection, but something wild and real and terrifying in its intensity. "This is crazy," she whispered, but she was already standing, her hand still in his. "Sanity is overrated," he smiled, leading her toward the exit. "Sometimes the craziest decisions are the ones that save us." The Vegas night enveloped them as they stepped outside, the air electric with possibility. Street performers and tourists blurred past as they walked, their destination clear, though neither had spoken it. The little white wedding chapel glowed like a beacon in the night, its neon promise of eternal love, both tacky and somehow perfect. Lennox never let go of her hand as they approached the entrance, giving her every opportunity to back out, to return to the safety of her planned existence. But Lilibet Davies had spent her entire life playing it safe, following the rules, being the person everyone expected her to be. Look where that had gotten her. Maybe it was time to be reckless, to take a leap of faith into the unknown. "Last chance to run," Lennox murmured as they reached the chapel doors. Lilibet looked up at him, this beautiful stranger who felt more real than anyone she'd known for years. "I'm done running," she replied, and pushed open the door. The chapel's interior was exactly as Vegas as she'd expected. Pink walls, fake flowers, and an Elvis impersonator who would probably perform their ceremony. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Lennox looked at her as they filled out the paperwork, like she was a masterpiece he couldn't quite believe was real. As they exchanged simple gold bands under the watchful eye of Elvis, Lilibet felt something she never had with James: peace. This insane decision, this leap into the unknown with a man she'd known for hours, felt more right than 3 years of carefully planned perfection ever had. "You may kiss the bride," Elvis announced, and Lennox pulled her close. His kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better. It was fire and promise and possibility, all wrapped into one moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. "Mrs. Orion," he whispered against her lips, and the name sent shivers down her spine. They barely made it back to his penthouse suite, because of course he had the penthouse, before desire overtook them both. Their first time together was passionate, desperate, as if they were trying to make up for all the years they hadn't known each other existed. As they lay tangled in silk sheets afterward, Lennox traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked, and she heard the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. "Ask me in the morning," she replied, snuggling closer to him. But as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of her new husband, Lilibet knew the truth. For the first time in her life, she'd made a decision based purely on instinct rather than logic, and it felt absolutely right. Little did she know that morning would bring revelations that would make her impromptu wedding seem like the most rational decision she'd ever made. Lennox Orion was more than just a handsome stranger in a Vegas bar. He was about to turn her world upside down in ways she couldn't begin to imagine, but for now she slept peacefully, protected by the arms of a man who had seen her broken pieces and chosen her anyway. Sometimes, she realized as sleep claimed her, the best love stories start with a little bit of crazy. Chapter 3. Morning Light. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden patterns across silk sheets worth more than most people's monthly rent. Lilibet stirred slowly, her consciousness gradually piecing together the events of the previous night. The weight of the platinum band on her left hand confirmed it hadn't been a dream. She was married to a stranger in Vegas. The space beside her was empty but still warm, and the sound of a shower running in the adjacent bathroom told her where her new husband had gone. Husband. The word felt foreign in her mind, yet somehow right when associated with Lennox Orion. As her artist's eye took in her surroundings, details she'd missed in last night's passion began to emerge. The suite wasn't just luxurious, it was extraordinary. Original paintings hung on the walls, not the generic hotel art she was accustomed to seeing. Her breath caught as she recognized a Rothko, its vibrant colors commanding attention in the morning light. The bedside table held a Patek Philippe watch that she knew cost more than her first gallery showing. A leather briefcase bearing the subtle but unmistakable logo of Hermès rested against a chair, alongside a suit jacket that screamed Savile Row. "Good morning, Mrs. Orion." Lennox's voice drew her attention to the bathroom doorway. He stood there in nothing but a towel, water droplets trailing down his chest, looking even more devastatingly handsome in daylight. But it was his eyes that held her, intense, observant, catching every micro-expression that crossed her face as she processed their surroundings. "The Rothko is real, isn't it?" she asked, her art dealer instincts kicking in despite the situation. A smile tugged at his lips. "Yes, as is the Monet in the living room, though I prefer your work." Lilibet sat up, clutching the silk sheet to her chest. "Who are you, really?" "The same man you married last night." He approached the bed, sitting on its edge near her. "Though perhaps with a few additional details I should have mentioned." Before he could continue, a discreet knock at the door interrupted them. Lennox rose with fluid grace, donning a plush robe before answering. A parade of hotel staff entered, wheeling in an elaborate breakfast spread that wouldn't have looked out of place at a royal reception. "Your usual morning selection, Mr. Orion," the butler, because of course there was a butler, announced with practiced deference. "And I've taken the liberty of having the kitchen prepare some additional options for Mrs. Orion." The way he said her new name, with such natural acceptance, made this surreal situation suddenly very real. Lilibet watched as the staff moved with choreographed precision, setting up a breakfast that included everything from fresh-baked croissants to caviar. "The morning papers, sir," another staff member approached with a selection of publications, "though you may wish to review them privately first." Lennox's expression darkened slightly as he glanced at the headlines. After the staff departed, he handed one to Lilibet. Her heart stopped as she read, "Orion Airwed's mystery artist in Vegas, Wall Street's most eligible bachelor off the market." The accompanying photo, clearly taken by someone at the chapel, showed them exchanging rings. She looked radiant, laughing at something Elvis had said, while Lennox gazed at her with undisguised adoration. "Orion," she whispered, the magnitude of that name finally registering. "As in Orion Global Investments? The company that owns half of Manhattan's skyline?" "Among other things." Lennox sat beside her again, his expression carefully neutral. "I should have told you last night. Would I have married you if I knew? That's exactly why I didn't tell you." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "Every woman I've ever dated has seen the name first and the man second. Last night, you saw me. Just me." The sincerity in his voice touched something in her heart, but questions still tumbled through her mind. "The papers are calling you Wall Street's most eligible bachelor. Surely there must be someone—" "An arranged marriage," he cut in, his jaw tightening. "My family has been pressuring me to marry Elena Rothschild. Our grandfathers had an agreement." "Had?" His smile turned wolfish. "Well, I'm already married now, aren't I?" The implication slowly sank in. She hadn't just married a wealthy man, she'd married into one of the most powerful families in America. The Orions were old money, the kind of wealth that shaped economies and influenced governments. Your family will adapt, he stated firmly. I'm not James, Lilibet. I make my own choices, and I stand by them. The mention of James brought reality crashing back. My God, she laughed suddenly, the sound slightly hysterical. I ran away from a cheating investment banker and accidentally married a billionaire. To be fair, I'm much better looking than James, Lennox teased, drawing another laugh from her. He grew serious then, taking both her hands in his. I understand if this changes things. If you want an annulment. No. The word escaped before she could analyze it, but she knew it was true. Unless... Do you want one? His response was to pull her into a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings on the matter. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. What I want, he murmured, is to take my wife back to New York, show her the empire she's now part of, and spend the rest of our lives making James Winchester regret every breath he took while he had you. That sounds vindictively romantic. I prefer to think of it as strategic planning with passionate intent. A thought struck her then, making her pull back slightly. The gallery opening next week. I cancelled everything when I ran away. Uncancelled, he smiled. My assistant contacted yours this morning. Everything's back on schedule with a few upgrades. Upgrades? Let's just say the guest list now includes every major collector and critic on the East Coast. Your work deserves to be seen, Lilibet, and now you have the resources to ensure it will be. She should have felt overwhelmed, should have been running for the hills. Instead, she felt peaceful, like all the chaos of the past few days had been leading her exactly where she needed to be. There will be talk, she warned. People will say I trapped you, that I'm after your money. Let them talk. His expression hardened. Anyone who dares insult my wife will find themselves dealing with the full force of the Orion family's influence. The possessive note in his voice sent shivers down her spine. This was nothing like James's tepid declarations of love. Lennox spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who could reshape reality to match his desires. You don't even know if we're compatible long-term, she pointed out, ever the practical one despite the circumstances. I know that you're brilliant, talented, and strong enough to walk away from a comfortable life when it proved false. I know that you see the world in colors and shadows that others miss. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like watching the sun rise. He cupped her face in his hands. Everything else we'll figure out together. A chime from his phone interrupted the moment. He glanced at it, his expression shifting to one of amused anticipation. What is it? She asked. My mother just received the news. He showed her the message. She's demanding we return to New York immediately for a proper celebration. Is that good or bad? Good. If she was truly angry, she'd be on a private jet to Vegas right now. He kissed her forehead. She'll love you, once she sees how happy you make me. And your father. We'll be delighted that I've ruined the Rothschild arrangement. He never liked Elena's father anyway. Reality began to set in as Lilibet contemplated returning to New York. Catherine and James will see the news. Good. Lennox's smile held a predatory edge. I want them to see exactly what they lost. Speaking of which, he reached for his phone again, typing quickly. What are you doing? Buying the building that houses James's investment firm. I think it's time for some major renovations. They might need to relocate, perhaps to New Jersey. Lilibet laughed despite herself. That's positively evil. I prefer to think of it as karmic redistribution. He pulled her close. No one hurts what's mine, Lilibet, and you're very much mine now. As his lips found hers again, Lilibet realized that her impulsive Vegas wedding might just turn out to be the best decision she'd ever made. She'd run away to escape one life and stumbled into another that felt more real, more right than anything she'd known before. The morning sun caught her wedding ring, sending prisms dancing across the walls. Sometimes, she thought, the best revenge isn't just living well. It's living extraordinarily well with someone who sees your worth without needing to be shown. Las Vegas had given her more than an escape. It had given her a future brighter than any she dared to dream of. And as Lennox pulled her back into bed, breakfast forgotten, Lilibet knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Chapter 4. Hidden Wealth. The Orion private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport just as the sun was setting over Manhattan. Lilibet watched through the window as the skyline came into view, a familiar sight now tinged with new meaning. Somewhere in that maze of steel and glass, James and Catherine were probably seeing the news of her marriage plastered across every financial and society page. Having second thoughts, Lennox asked, his hand warm on her knee. About you? No. She turned to face him, still amazed by how natural it felt to be here with him. About facing New York society as Mrs. Orion, maybe a little. They'll love you, he assured her, though his eyes held a predatory gleam. And those who don't will learn to keep their opinions to themselves. The door opened, and Lilibet's first glimpse of her new life awaited. A fleet of black Rolls-Royces lined the private terminal, each bearing the subtle Orion family crest. A small army of security personnel stood at attention, while efficient-looking assistants tapped on tablets, orchestrating their arrival with military precision. Mr. and Mrs. Orion, a distinguished older man stepped forward, his British accent crisp. Welcome home. I'm Harrison, the family's chief of staff. A pleasure, Lilibet managed, trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel. Your mother is waiting at the penthouse, Harrison informed Lennox. She's been redecorating, Lennox groaned. How bad? The East Wing has been transformed into what she calls a proper newlywed suite. There are more flowers than the botanical garden. They slipped into the lead Rolls-Royce, its interior a cocoon of leather and luxury. As they merged into traffic, Lilibet noticed other cars falling into formation around them. Security, she realized. The Orions didn't just have money, they had the kind of wealth that required constant protection. There's something you should know before we reach the penthouse, Lennox said, his expression serious. The Orion family residence isn't just a home, it's a statement. She soon understood what he meant. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue and pulled up to a building she'd passed 1,000 times, a magnificent pre-war structure that occupied an entire block. She'd always wondered who owned the top floors, with their sweeping terraces and Gothic architecture. Welcome to Orion House, Lennox murmured as they entered through a private entrance. The lobby was more museum than residential space, with soaring ceilings, priceless artworks, and marble floors that echoed their footsteps. A dedicated elevator, gold-plated, she noted, with a mixture of awe and amusement, whisked them to the top. The doors opened directly into what could only be described as a palace in the sky. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across rooms larger than her entire apartment. Original masterpieces hung on walls covered in silk wallpaper, and every surface gleamed with the patina of old money. Lennox, an elegant woman, descended a sweeping staircase, her Chanel suit impeccable despite the late hour. And this must be my new daughter-in-law? Victoria Orion was everything Lilibet had imagined, and nothing she'd expected. Her grace was natural, her smile genuine as she embraced Lilibet. Welcome to the family, my dear, she said warmly, though next time, perhaps give us a bit more notice before the wedding. Mother, Lennox warned, but Victoria waved him off. Oh, hush, I'm delighted. Elena Rothschild was about as exciting as dry toast. She linked her arm through Lilibet's. Now, come see what I've done with your suite. The art gallery lighting is being installed tomorrow. Lennox mentioned you're an artist. As Victoria led them through the penthouse, Lilibet's head spun. Every room revealed new wonders, a library with first editions worth millions, a conservatory filled with rare orchids, a dining room that could seat 50. "Your father is flying back from Tokyo tonight," Victoria informed them. "He's cancelling the rest of his Asia tour to welcome you properly. And of course, we'll need to plan a reception, something intimate, just 400 or 500 of our closest friends." "Mother," Lennox began. "Darling, we must. The Rothschilds are already making noise about breach of contract. We need to show a united front." She turned to Lilibet. "You'll need a proper wardrobe, of course. I've arranged appointments with all the major houses tomorrow." "I have clothes," Lilibet protested weakly. "You have an artist's wardrobe," Victoria corrected kindly. "You need armor. Trust me, dear, I've navigated these waters for 30 years. They reached the East Wing, and Lilibet gasped. The space had been transformed into a dream suite, with a sitting room overlooking Central Park, a bathroom larger than her old apartment, and a bedroom that managed to be both opulent and intimate. The artwork. She moved closer to one wall, recognizing her own style. "I had my people track down every piece of yours available for purchase," Victoria said proudly. "Lennox mentioned you'd sold your first collections. I thought you might like to have them close." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Lilibet's eyes. This wasn't the cold society matron she'd feared. This was a woman who understood the importance of maintaining one's identity, even while adapting to a new world. "Thank you," she whispered. "We protect our own," Victoria stated simply. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we begin your transformation into an Orion." After Victoria left, Lennox pulled Lilibet into his arms. "See? I told you she'd love you." "She's not what I expected." "The Orion women never are." He kissed her temple. "Ready to see what's in the closet?" The walk-in closet was bigger than her old gallery. Racks of designer clothes, all in her size, filled one wall. Another held shoes from every major designer, while a climate-controlled room housed bags that probably cost more than most cars. "This is insane," she breathed. "This is your life now," Lennox corrected. "You're an Orion. It's time the world saw you that way." A notification chimed on both their phones, an alert from their security team. Someone had leaked their marriage certificate to the press. The story was breaking across all major networks. Lennox read the notification and smiled. "Right on schedule." "You planned this?" "I planned everything." He showed her his phone, where a photo of James and Catherine leaving their office was already trending. "They look appropriately shocked, don't you think?" Lilibet studied the image. James's face was ashen, while Catherine clutched his arm with white-knuckled fingers. They looked small somehow, diminished. "You're rather terrifying when you want to be," she told her husband. "Only to those who deserve it." He pulled her close. "Tomorrow, New York society will meet Mrs. Lilibet Orion. They'll see your strength, your talent, your grace under pressure, and they'll understand exactly what James threw away." As she fell asleep that night in their palatial new bedroom, Lilibet realized that her impulsive Vegas wedding hadn't just given her a husband, it had given her a fortress. The Orion name was more than wealth. It was power, protection, and the freedom to become who she was always meant to be. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight in Lennox's arms, she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes, she thought as sleep claimed her, the best revenge isn't just marrying well. It's marrying someone who makes you realize you never needed revenge in the first place. Chapter 5. Growing Love. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden light across Lilibet's easel. She'd converted part of their private terrace into a studio, finding peace in the familiar smell of oils and turpentine, even as her world transformed around her. 3 weeks into her marriage, and she was still discovering new facets of life as Mrs. Orion. "You've captured his eyes perfectly," Victoria commented, appearing silently beside her. Lilibet's mother-in-law had developed a habit of dropping by unannounced, always bearing either wisdom or la durée macaron. Today she had both. The portrait on the easel showed Lennox in a moment of unguarded tenderness, his usual sharp edges softened by the intimacy of the scene. Lilibet had caught him reading in their library, winter light highlighting the angles of his face, his expression peaceful. "He's different when we're alone," Lilibet admitted, accepting a macaron. "The world sees Lennox Orion, financial titan. I see just Lennox. That's why you're perfect for him." Victoria settled into a nearby chair with characteristic grace. "You see the man, not the empire, though I must say you're handling the empire remarkably well." It was true. The past weeks had been a crash course in navigating high society, and Lilibet had proven to be an apt student. Her first public appearance as Mrs. Orion had made headlines, not for any missteps, but for the quiet confidence she exhibited. "I had good teachers," Lilibet smiled, thinking of Victoria's patient guidance and Lennox's unwavering support. "Speaking of which," Victoria produced a tablet from her Hermes bag, "the guest list for your gallery opening tomorrow night has grown. The governor confirmed, and the Met's new director is coming specifically to discuss your fall exhibition." The gallery opening, her first as both artist and Mrs. Orion. The thought still sent butterflies through her stomach, though not entirely unpleasant ones. Her work had evolved in recent weeks, taking on new depth and complexity as her life transformed. "Have they confirmed?" Lilibet asked, not needing to specify who she meant. "James and Catherine?" "Yes." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "They could hardly decline, considering James's firm handles investments for half the guest list. Though I hear New Jersey is lovely this time of year." Lennox had made good on his promise about the building renovation. James's firm was indeed relocating to New Jersey, a fact that brought more amusement than satisfaction to Lilibet now. "I used to dream about revenge," she confessed, adding another stroke to Lennox's portrait. "Now it seems unnecessary, because you've found something better than revenge, genuine happiness." Victoria rose, brushing invisible dust from her Chanel suit. "Now finish that masterpiece and come down for lunch. Your father-in-law wants to discuss the new charitable foundation he's creating in your name." After Victoria left, Lilibet continued painting, losing herself in the play of light and shadow. She barely registered the passing time until familiar arms wrapped around her waist. "You're making me look far too handsome," Lennox murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "I'm painting what I see." She leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth. "Liar," but his voice was tender. "Ready for tomorrow night?" "Yes," she realized, somewhat surprised by her own certainty. "Though not for the reasons I expected." "Oh?" She turned in his arms, studying the face she'd just spent hours painting. "A month ago, I wanted to show James what he'd lost. Now, I want to show the world what I've found. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. His kiss was gentle, a contrast to his usual intensity. "You've changed me too, you know. The great Lennox Orion, changed by a Vegas wedding," she teased. "Transformed by love," he corrected seriously. "I used to see the world in terms of assets and liabilities, strategies and outcomes. Now I see it through your eyes, full of color and possibility." The confession touched something deep in her heart. This was the Lennox only she got to see, the man behind the power and wealth. Her husband, who could reshape markets with a phone call, but still brought her coffee in bed every morning. "I love you," she said simply, the words feeling natural, right? His eyes darkened with emotion. "Say it again." "I love you, Lennox Orion," He captured her mouth in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something more urgent. Paint-stained fingers tangled in his perfectly pressed shirt, leaving artistic evidence of their passion. "Your mother is expecting us for lunch," she gasped as his lips traced her neck. "She'll understand." He lifted her easily, carrying her toward their bedroom. Some things are more important than social obligations. Later, curled together in their massive bed, Lilibet traced patterns on his chest. "Do you ever regret it, our crazy Vegas wedding?" "Never." His answer was immediate, fierce. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to. Everything before was just preparation for this." A chime from his phone interrupted the moment. Lennox checked it, his expression shifting to one of amused satisfaction. "What is it?" "Elena Rothschild just RSVP'd for tomorrow night." He showed her the message. "Apparently she's eager to meet the woman who derailed her carefully planned future." "Should I be worried?" "About Elena?" "No." He kissed her softly. "About the way you'll outshine everyone in that gallery. Absolutely." Lilibet smiled, remembering the gown Victoria had helped her select, a masterpiece of silk and subtle embroidery that made her feel invincible. "I have a few surprises planned." "Do tell." "Well, for one, I've been working on a new series." She gestured to a covered canvas in the corner. "It's called Transformation. The centerpiece is a phoenix rising from golden ashes." His eyes softened with understanding. "Rising from the ashes of your old life? Into something more beautiful than I ever imagined." She kissed him lightly. "With a man who sees the real me." "Always," he promised. "Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Society's scrutiny, Elena's appearance, the inevitable confrontation with James and Catherine. But here, in the sanctuary of their love, none of that mattered. Lilibet had run away to Vegas hoping to escape pain. Instead, she'd found a love story greater than any she could have painted. And tomorrow night, the world would see exactly what that love had created, in her art, in her life, and in the woman she'd become. Sometimes, she thought as Lennox pulled her close again, the greatest masterpieces aren't painted on canvas. They're written in the heart, one unexpected moment at a time. Chapter 6. Unexpected News. The morning sickness hit Lilibet like a tidal wave, sending her rushing to their marble bathroom for the third time that week. She'd blamed it on nerves at first. The gallery opening had been intense, with Elena Rothschild's calculated barbs and James's pathetic attempts at reconciliation. But as Victoria's knowing glances grew more pointed, Lilibet finally scheduled an appointment with the Orion family's private physician. Now, sitting in Dr. Montgomery's Park Avenue office, her hand clasped tightly in Lennox's, she struggled to process the news. "Triplets," Dr. Montgomery repeated, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he pointed to the ultrasound screen. "All 3 fetuses are developing perfectly. Based on the measurements, you're approximately 8 weeks along." Lennox's grip on her hand tightened. 3 babies?" His voice held a mixture of awe and disbelief. 2 boys and a girl," the doctor confirmed, moving the ultrasound wand to show each tiny heartbeat. "All equally strong and healthy." Las Vegas had given them more than just a marriage, it seemed. Their first night together had created not 1 miracle, but 3. "I know this is overwhelming," Dr. Montgomery continued, his tone gentle. "Multiple pregnancies require special care, but you'll have access to the best medical team in the country. The Orion family has a private wing at New York Presbyterian, and I've already contacted the top maternal fetal medicine specialists." Lilibet barely heard him, her attention fixed on the screen where 3 tiny lives pulsed in black and white. Her free hand drifted to her still flat stomach, wondering how she'd missed the signs. The fatigue she'd attributed to her busy schedule, the sudden aversion to the smell of oil paints, the way her clothes had felt slightly tighter. "Lilibet!" Lennox's voice drew her back to the present. His eyes, when she met them, shone with unconcealed joy. "Are you okay?" "We're having 3 babies," she whispered, a smile breaking through her shock. 3! His response was to pull her into a kiss that made Dr. Montgomery tactfully excuse himself from the room. When they finally parted, Lennox pressed his forehead to hers, his hand joining hers over her stomach. "Thank you," he murmured, voice thick with emotion, "for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." The drive home was a blur of happy tears and stunned laughter. Harrison, their ever-efficient chief of staff, had already been briefed and was coordinating with the family's security team to increase protection protocols for the pregnant Mrs. Orion. "Your mother's going to be ecstatic," Lilibet realized as their elevator ascended to the penthouse. 3 grandchildren at once? "She's already redecorating the West Wing," Lennox admitted. "Apparently, she's had her suspicions for weeks." Victoria was waiting in the grand salon, practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. One look at their faces confirmed what she'd already guessed. "Well?" she demanded, rising from her antique settee with perfect poise. "You're getting 3 grandchildren, Mother," Lennox announced, his arm tight around Lilibet's waist. 2 boys and a girl." Victoria's composure cracked. With a very un-society matron-like squeal, she enveloped them both in a tight embrace. "I knew it. The way you've been glowing lately, darling, and that incident with the coffee last week." Lilibet laughed, remembering how she'd suddenly couldn't stand the smell of her favorite morning brew. "You could have given me a heads up and missed the joy of this moment." Victoria wiped elegant tears from her eyes. "Never. Now sit down before you fall down. You're growing 3 Orions in there. You need your rest." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of activity that only the Orions could generate. Victoria's team of interior designers presented plans for a state-of-the-art nursery suite. Security protocols were upgraded. Harrison coordinated with the family's PR team about the eventual announcement. Through it all, Lennox never left her side, his usual sharp business focus softened by wonder every time he looked at her. "I can feel you worrying," he murmured as they finally retired to their private suite that evening. "Talk to me." Lilibet curled into his embrace, letting his strength anchor her. "It's not worry exactly, more like overwhelming joy mixed with terror. We've only been married 2 months and now we're having 3 babies. What if—" "Don't." He cut her off with a gentle kiss. "No what ifs. We're in this together. You've already proven you can handle anything life throws at you with grace and strength. This is just our next adventure." 3 babies, she marveled again, placing his hand over her stomach. "They'll need names." "Strong names," he agreed. "Names worthy of their heritage, but unique enough to be their own people." "Like their father," she teased, thinking of how Lennox had forged his own path despite the weight of family expectations. "Like their mother," he corrected, "who turned a Vegas escape into an epic love story." They spent the next hour discussing names, dreams, and plans for their expanding family. Lennox's phone buzzed occasionally with congratulatory messages from the family's inner circle who'd been informed of the news. But he ignored them all, focused entirely on his wife and their miracle. "Elena Rothschild will be furious," Lilibet realized suddenly. "This definitely kills any hope of the arranged marriage being salvaged." "Good." Lennox's smile held a hint of that predatory edge she'd come to love. "Let her be furious. You've given me something she never could, a love worth choosing and a family born from that love." "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted softly. "After James, I thought my chance at a family was over. Now I have you, and soon we'll have 3 babies." "You have more than that," he reminded her. You have the entire Orion family behind you. Our children will be the most protected, loved, and supported babies in New York." "Poor James," she mused, though there was no bitterness in her voice. He thought he was trading up with Catherine, and instead, he lost the most precious thing he'll ever find. Lennox kissed her deeply. "His loss, my infinite gain." That night, as Lilibet drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The universe had taken her broken heart and turned it into something magnificent, a love story that would soon have 3 new chapters. Las Vegas had given her more than an escape. It had given her a destiny greater than any she could have imagined. And as Lennox's hand rested protectively over their growing miracles, she knew that this was just the beginning of their extraordinary tale. Sometimes, she thought as sleep claimed her, the best revenge isn't just finding happiness, it's finding a happiness so complete that revenge becomes meaningless. In her case, that happiness now came with 3 tiny heartbeats and a love strong enough to support them all. Chapter 7. Shadow's Return. The news broke on a crisp autumn morning, splashed across every major newspaper and financial publication. Orion dynasty secured, triplet heirs on the way. The Wall Street Journal devoted its entire society section to the announcement, while Bloomberg ran a special segment on the implications for Orion Global Investments succession planning. Lilibet stood in her private studio, now modified to be pregnancy-safe, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror. At 4 months along, her belly had begun to show distinctly, impossible to hide in the Valentino dress she'd chosen for tonight's charity gala. "The media's going crazy," Lennox announced, entering with his tablet in hand. "Orion stock is up 12%, just on the news of multiple heirs." "Only the Orions could turn a pregnancy into a market rally," she teased, turning to accept his good morning kiss. "How are my 4 favorite people this morning?" His hand splayed protectively over her growing bump. Before she could answer, Victoria swept in, already immaculately dressed despite the early hour. "The responses are overwhelming. Every major family on the East Coast is sending congratulations. The Rothschilds, however—" "Elena made a statement," Lilibet guessed, noting her mother-in-law's expression. "Page 6 is running with her quote about convenient timing and rushed marriages." Victoria's smile turned sharp. "I've already handled it." "Mother," Lennox warned, "what did you do?" "Nothing dramatic. I simply reminded certain people about Elena's own indiscretions during her semester in Paris. Amazing how quickly stories can disappear when the right pressure is applied." A knock at the door interrupted them. Harrison entered, his usual efficiency tinged with concern. "Mrs. Orion, you have a visitor. James Winchester is in the lobby, insisting on speaking with you." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Lennox straightened, his protective instincts flaring. "Absolutely not." "Wait," Lilibet touched his arm. "I should see him." "Lilibet, I'm not the same woman he betrayed," she reminded him softly. "Let me handle this." After a moment of internal struggle, Lennox nodded. "Harrison, have security bring him to the Blue Salon and stay within earshot." The Blue Salon, with its priceless French antiques and commanding views of Central Park, was designed to intimidate. Lilibet settled regally onto a Louis XV settee, smoothing her dress over her bump. When James was shown in, she barely recognized him. Gone was the confident investment banker who'd broken her heart. This James looked smaller somehow, his designer suit failing to mask his discomfort. "Lilibet," he started, then stopped, his eyes fixed on her pregnant belly. "James." Her voice was cool, controlled. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she once found endearing. Now it just seemed pathetic. Triplets? With him? My husband, she corrected firmly. Yes, 2 boys and a girl. I always thought... He trailed off, looking lost. We talked about having children. We talked about a lot of things, James. Then you slept with my best friend. He flinched. I made a mistake. Seeing you now with him carrying his children, I realize what I threw away. No, Lilibet's voice took on steel. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up at my home in my new life and play the regretful ex. I'm happy, James. Truly, deeply happy. Something I never was with you, though I didn't know it then. The papers say you met him in Vegas, James pressed. Married him the same night. That's not the Lilibet I knew. You never knew me. You knew the version of me that tried to fit into your world. Lennox, she smiled, touching her bump where one of the babies had just kicked. Lennox loves me exactly as I am. Every messy, artistic, impulsive part of me. He's different, James argued. The Orions, they're not like us. They're powerful, she finished. Yes, they are. But that's not why I love him. I love him because he sees me, truly sees me. Something you never did. A knock at the door signaled Harrison's return. Mrs. Orion, your doctor's appointment is in 30 minutes. Thank you, Harrison. She rose gracefully, one hand supporting her bump. I think we're done here. Lily, please. Goodbye, James. She moved toward the door, then paused. I hope you and Catherine find happiness, I truly do, because I found something better than happiness. I found myself, and a man who loves every part of who I am. She left him standing there, surrounded by the trappings of a world he could never truly understand. In the hallway, she found Lennox waiting, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. Okay? He asked simply. Perfect, she assured him, reaching up to kiss him softly. He's so small now. I don't know how I never saw it before. Because you've grown, he murmured against her hair, into who you were always meant to be. Later that evening, as they prepared for the charity gala, Lilibet shared a quiet moment with Victoria in the family vault, selecting jewelry for the evening. You handled him beautifully, her mother-in-law commented, fastening a spectacular diamond necklace around Lilibet's neck. Like a true Orion. I almost felt sorry for him, Lilibet admitted. He looked so lost. Men like James Winchester often are, Victoria observed. They chase what they think they should want, never understanding what they actually need. She stepped back, studying her handiwork. Perfect. You're going to own that room tonight. The gala proved Victoria right. Lilibet floated through the evening on Lennox's arm, her pregnancy giving her an extra glow that no diamonds could match. The old money families, who had initially viewed her with skepticism, now fawned over her, eager to align themselves with the future Orion heirs. Elena Rothschild is watching you, Lennox murmured during a dance, his hand protective at her waist. Let her watch, Lilibet smiled, feeling the babies move. Your children are dancing too. His eyes softened with love. Our children, he corrected. The next generation of Orions, who will be as beautiful and strong as their mother. As they moved across the dance floor, Lilibet caught glimpses of their story reflected in the faces around them. James and Catherine at their assigned table, looking strained. Elena Rothschild by the bar, her perfect features twisted with barely concealed envy. Victoria holding court with other society matrons, proudly discussing her future grandchildren. Penny for your thoughts? Lennox asked as the song ended. I was just thinking about fate, she replied. How one desperate decision in Vegas led to all of this. You, our babies, this life I never dreamed I could have. Not fate, he kissed her softly, ignoring the cameras that immediately started clicking. Choice. You chose to be brave, to take a chance on a stranger. I chose to trust my heart when I saw you in that bar. And now we're choosing to build a family together. Their moment was interrupted by the babies, delivering a particularly strong kick, making them both laugh. Lennox's hand immediately went to her bump, his smile radiant as he felt their children move. I think they're saying hello to their daddy, Lilibet teased. Hello, little ones, he murmured, not caring that half of New York society was watching this intimate moment. Keep growing strong in there. The world is waiting to meet you. As the evening wound down, Lilibet realized something profound. The shadows of her past, James, Catherine, Elena, they weren't shadows at all anymore. They were simply background characters in a story that had grown far beyond them. Her real story was here, in Lennox's arms, with their babies growing beneath her heart and a future brighter than any she could have painted. Sometimes, she thought as they headed home, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living authentically, surrounded by a love so pure it transforms everything it touches. And her love story, improbable as it had begun, was just getting started. Chapter 8. Truth and Trust. The nursery suite in the west wing of Orion House had been transformed into a wonderland. Hand-painted murals depicting fairy tales wrapped around the walls, while 3 identical custom cribs, crafted by the same artisans who made furniture for European royalty, waited for their precious occupants. Lilibet stood in the center of it all, one hand resting on her 7-month belly, the other holding a small velvet box. "What's this?" Lennox asked, entering the room with his jacket off and sleeves rolled up, having just returned from a board meeting. "Open it," she smiled, handing him the box. Inside lay 3 tiny gold bracelets, each delicately engraved. "For the babies?" "I had them made from my old engagement ring from James," she explained. "I wanted to transform something from my past into something beautiful for our future." Lennox's eyes softened as he read the engravings. Atlas Kingston Orion, Phoenix Wild Orion, and Aurora Rose Orion. "Do you like the names?" They'd spent weeks debating, wanting each child to have a name that carried both strength and meaning. "They're perfect," he pulled her close, careful of her growing bump, "like their mother." The babies chose that moment to make their presence known, delivering a series of kicks that made them both laugh. At 7 months with triplets, Lilibet's petite frame was significantly changed, but Lennox looked at her with more desire than ever. "I have something for you too," he said, leading her to sit in the custom rocking chair, "though it's not quite as meaningful as your gift." He pulled out a large envelope from his briefcase. Inside were papers that made Lilibet's eyes widen. "You bought the entire block," she gasped, reading the real estate documents. "I'm converting it into the Lilibet Orion Art Center," he explained, his eyes alight with excitement. "A gallery space for emerging artists, studios for rent at below market rates, and a foundation to provide grants for artists who need support, like you needed once." Tears filled her eyes. This wasn't just a grand gesture, it was a deep understanding of who she was and what mattered to her. "Lennox, there's more," he continued, sitting beside her. "The top floor will be your private studio, large enough for any project you want to undertake, with a separate playroom so you can work while being near the babies." "You think of everything," she whispered, pulling him down for a kiss. "I think of you," he corrected, "and our family." A knock at the door interrupted them. Harrison entered, followed by Dr. Montgomery for Lilibet's weekly checkup. "How are our little Orions doing?" the doctor asked, setting up his portable ultrasound equipment. "Active," Lilibet laughed, "especially at night." The checkup revealed 3 healthy babies, growing right on schedule. Dr. Montgomery's expression, however, held a note of concern. "What is it?" Lennox demanded, instantly alert. "Nothing alarming," the doctor assured them, But with triplets at this stage, we need to discuss the possibility of bed rest. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, Mrs. Orion. No, Lilibet protested. The Arts Center opening is in 2 weeks. I need to be there. Our priority is your health and the babies, Lennox said firmly. The Arts Center can wait. Actually, Dr. Montgomery interjected, light activity is still beneficial, but we'll need to monitor you closely. No long periods standing, no stress, and absolutely no dealing with board members or society events. Lennox's phone buzzed. Elena Rothschild was making waves again, this time with implications about the timing of the pregnancy. He silenced it without looking. Already handled. Mother has taken over all social obligations, and the board can deal with me directly. After the doctor left, they remained in the nursery, Lennox kneeling before Lilibet's chair with his hands on her bump. I never told you about the night I met you, he said suddenly. What I was really doing in that bar. Running from the arranged marriage, she guessed. More than that. He took a deep breath. That morning, I discovered Elena had been working with a rival firm, using our engagement to gather insider information. The marriage arrangement wasn't just about family alliances, it was a corporate takeover attempt. Lilibet gasped. Did she succeed? No, his smile turned predatory, because I met you instead. While the Rothschilds were plotting their takeover, I was falling in love in Vegas. By the time they realized what had happened, all their carefully placed pieces were useless. Because you were already married to me. Because I was already saved by you, he corrected. You think I rescued you that night, but you rescued me too. From a loveless marriage, from a life of strategic alliances instead of real connections. She ran her fingers through his hair, loving how he leaned into her touch. Is that why Elena's so bitter? Because she lost both the man and the merger? She lost something she never had. He kissed her palm. I was never hers to lose. Their moment was interrupted by Victoria's arrival, bearing shopping bags and her tablet. The nursery staff interviews are scheduled for tomorrow, she announced. I've narrowed it down to the top candidates, all with multiple birth experience and impeccable references. I still think 3 nannies is excessive, Lilibet protested. Darling, Victoria sat gracefully in a nearby armchair, you're having 3 Orion babies. Trust me, you'll need all the help you can get. I had 2 nannies just for Lennox, and he was only 1 baby. A perfectly well-behaved baby, Lennox added innocently. You scaled the mansion's facade at age 4 because you wanted to see if you could, his mother reminded him dryly. We had to hire a security expert specifically to Lennox-proof the house. Lilibet laughed, imagining a tiny Lennox causing chaos. What if our children inherit your adventurous spirit? Then we'll need 6 nannies, Victoria declared. Now, about the baptism gowns. I've had them handmade in Ireland, but we should discuss the ceremony details. As Victoria laid out plans for every possible aspect of the baby's first year, Lilibet felt overwhelming gratitude for this family that had embraced her so completely. Her own parents, though loving, had been distant figures in her life, but Victoria had stepped into not just a mother-in-law role, but a true maternal one. I want to show you something, Lilibet said when Victoria paused for breath. With Lennox's help, she rose and moved to a covered canvas in the corner. I've been working on this between doctor's appointments. The painting she unveiled left both Orions speechless. It showed Victoria in her element, commanding a room full of New York's elite, but with a subtle softness around her eyes that only family ever saw. For the Art Center opening, Lilibet explained, a tribute to the woman who helped make it all possible. Victoria's perfect composure cracked. With tears in her eyes, she hugged Lilibet carefully. My darling girl, she whispered, you've given us so much more than we ever gave you. That night, lying in bed, With Lennox's hand protectively over her bump, Lilibet reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. "Penny for your thoughts," Lennox murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "I was thinking about truth," she replied. "How we both came to Vegas running from lies, yours with Elena, mine with James. But by being honest with each other from the start, even as strangers, we found something real," he finished. "Something true." "Exactly." She turned carefully to face him. "I know the pregnancy announcement said the Orion dynasty was secured, but that's not what these babies mean to me. They're not heirs or successors. They're pieces of our love story made real." "They're both," he said thoughtfully. "Legacy and love, duty and devotion. Like us." "Like us," she agreed, feeling the babies move as if in response. As they drifted off to sleep, Lilibet realized that the truth of their love story wasn't in the headlines or society gossip. It wasn't even in the grand gestures like art centers or family legacies. It was here, in these quiet moments, when the world fell away, and all that remained was their connection, honest, deep, and unshakable. Sometimes, she thought as sleep claimed her, the greatest truth isn't found in careful planning or social expectations. It's found in a Vegas bar, in a leap of faith, in the eyes of a stranger who sees straight to your soul, and their truth had given them not just love, but a future more beautiful than either could have imagined. Chapter 9. New Life. The storm that hit Manhattan that spring morning seemed to mirror the drama unfolding in the Orion private wing of New York Presbyterian Hospital. At 34 weeks pregnant with triplets, Lilibet had been admitted after her blood pressure spiked dangerously high during a routine checkup. "The babies need to come now," Dr. Montgomery announced, studying the monitors with concern. "Their heart rates are strong, but we can't risk waiting any longer." Lennox, who hadn't left her side since the admission, gripped her hand tighter. He'd been in the middle of a crucial merger meeting when Harrison interrupted with news of Lilibet's condition. The deal could wait. His family couldn't. "Everything's ready, Doctor," Montgomery continued. "We have the top NICU team standing by, though from what I'm seeing, these little Orions are already showing their strength." The operating room had been prepared to the exacting standards that the Orion name commanded. 3 separate teams of specialists waited to care for each baby, while the hospital's most experienced obstetric surgeons prepared for the C-section. "I'm scared," Lilibet whispered to Lennox as they wheeled her toward the OR, her voice trembling slightly. "I know, my love," he kissed her forehead. "But you're the strongest person I know. You turned a Vegas escape into the greatest love story ever told. Bringing our children into the world, that's just the next chapter." Victoria waited outside the OR, her perfect composure showing cracks of genuine concern. "Everything's arranged," she assured them. "The nurses are all vetted, security is in place, and I've had the entire floor cleared of anyone without direct medical necessity." "Thank you, Mother," Lennox said softly, the words carrying years of understanding between them. "Bring my grandchildren safely into the world," she replied, squeezing Lilibet's hand. "I'll be right here waiting." The OR was organized chaos, controlled by Dr. Montgomery's calm commands. Lennox, dressed in surgical scrubs that probably cost more than a regular doctor's monthly salary, kept his position by Lilibet's head, whispering words of love and encouragement. "Ready to meet our children?" he asked as the procedure began. "More than ready," she managed a smile. "They've been practicing their kickboxing skills on my ribs for weeks." At 9:47 a.m., Atlas Kingston Orion announced his arrival with a strong cry that brought tears to his father's eyes. "Just like his mother," Lennox murmured, making a dramatic entrance. Phoenix Wild Orion followed 2 minutes later, his cry slightly softer but equally determined. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency, checking and clearing each baby before moving them to their waiting incubators. At 9:52 a.m., Aurora Rose Orion completed their family, her cry a perfect melody that made Lilibet sob with joy. "She's here," she whispered. "They're all here. They're perfect." Lennox's voice cracked with emotion. All three of them. Perfect like their mother. The next hours passed in a blur of medical checks and first moments. Despite being early, all three babies were remarkably healthy, requiring minimal NICU time. The Orion genes, combined with Lilibet's strength, had given them a fighting start. When Lilibet was finally settled in her private suite, decorated more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital space, the babies were brought to them one by one. Atlas, the firstborn, had Lennox's strong features and intense gaze. Even at a few hours old, he seemed to study everything around him with remarkable focus. "He'll be running board meetings before he can walk," Victoria predicted proudly. Phoenix, slightly smaller than his brother but no less mighty, had a mix of both parents' features and a calm demeanor that belied his dramatic name. "The peacemaker," Lennox noted as the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. Aurora, their precious daughter, was a perfect blend of both parents, with Lilibet's delicate features and Lennox's commanding presence. She settled into her mother's arms like she belonged there, her tiny hand reaching up to touch Lilibet's face. "Hello, my loves," Lilibet whispered, surrounded by her three miracles. "Welcome to the world." The news of the triplets' arrival spread quickly through New York's elite circles. The hospital's reception was flooded with flowers and gifts, each carefully screened by security before being allowed near the Orion heirs. "Elena sent congratulations," Victoria mentioned casually, arranging a particularly spectacular bouquet of rare orchids. "Through gritted teeth, I imagine." "The Rothschilds have bigger problems," Lennox replied, never taking his eyes off his family. "Their attempted takeover cost them several key board positions. They're lucky I was too happy about becoming a father to pursue further action." "James sent something too," Harrison reported. "I had it returned unopened." Lilibet, who once would have felt a twinge at hearing James's name, merely smiled. How could she spare any thought for past pain when her present was so filled with joy? The babies were passed carefully between family members, each tiny Orion already showing hints of their unique personalities. Atlas, true to his name, seemed to carry the weight of his legacy with natural grace. Phoenix watched the world with quiet wisdom, while Aurora charmed everyone who held her with her perfect baby smile. "They're going to change the world," Victoria predicted, cradling Aurora. "These three will reshape New York society in ways we can't imagine." "They already have," Lennox murmured, watching his mother bond with his daughter. "They've given us something greater than social standing or corporate power. They've given us completion." That evening, when the parade of visitors had finally ended and the babies were sleeping peacefully in their bassinets, Lennox and Lilibet had a moment alone. "Thank you," he whispered, holding her close, "for giving me everything I never knew to dream of." "Thank you for being in that bar in Vegas," she replied, thinking of how close she'd come to choosing a different escape, "for seeing past my broken heart to who I could become." "I saw who you already were," he corrected. "Strong, beautiful, capable of extraordinary love. These babies, they're just proof of what I knew that first night, that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." A soft cry from Aurora's bassinet had them both moving, working in perfect sync to tend to their daughter's needs. As they settled back into each other's arms, their three miracles sleeping peacefully nearby, Lilibet felt a profound sense of rightness. "I used to think love was about grand gestures and perfect moments," she mused. "But it's this, isn't it? The quiet times, the shared smiles, the way you know exactly when I need you without my having to say a word. It's everything, Lennox agreed. The Vegas wedding, the society scandals, the corporate battles, they're just the backdrop. This, right here, is our real story. Outside their window, the storm that had ushered in the triplets' arrival began to clear, revealing a perfect spring evening. 3 new stars seemed to shine particularly bright, as if the universe itself was celebrating the arrival of the next generation of Orions. Sometimes, Lilibet thought, as she drifted off in her husband's arms, the best love stories aren't about the beginning or the dramatic middle. They're about the quiet moments of pure joy that make everything else fade away. And with 3 perfect babies sleeping nearby and a love stronger than any she'd imagined possible, she knew their story was just beginning its most beautiful chapter. Chapter 10. The Celebration. The Orion estate in the Hamptons had been transformed into a fairy tale wonderland for the triplets' first birthday. Crystal pavilions dotted the manicured lawns, while strings of lights turned the century-old oak trees into magical canopies. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society, with private jets filling the local airstrip and luxury cars lining the winding driveway. "Is all this really necessary?" Lilibet asked, watching from the master suite's balcony as an army of staff put final touches on the elaborate celebrations. "For the next generation of Orions?" "Absolutely," Victoria answered, entering with Aurora in her arms. The little girl, dressed in a custom-made Dior baby dress, reached for her mother immediately. "There's my princess," Lilibet cooed, taking her daughter. At 1 year old, Aurora was already showing signs of her mother's artistic temperament, fascinated by colors and always reaching for anything that sparkled. "The boys are with Lennox in the nursery," Victoria reported. "Atlas is trying to climb everything in sight, definitely his father's son, and Phoenix is methodically organizing his toys by color." "Again," Lilibet laughed, picturing her son's distinct personalities. The past year had been a whirlwind of joy, challenges and discoveries. Each baby was uniquely themselves, while still unmistakably Orion. "Harrison says the press is already gathering at the gates," Victoria continued. "The first pictures of the Orion heirs are quite the commodity." "Which is why we're releasing our own photos," Lennox stated, entering with 2 impeccably dressed baby boys in his arms. Atlas was indeed trying to climb over his father's shoulder, while Phoenix observed the room with his usual thoughtful expression. The family portraits taken last week would be released during the party, carefully curated images that showed the perfect Orion family while maintaining their privacy. It was a delicate balance, one they'd mastered over the past year. "The guests will start arriving soon," Victoria reminded them, "including some interesting additions to the list." "You invited them?" Lilibet asked her husband, knowing exactly who Victoria meant. "I did," Lennox confirmed, setting the boys down in their custom playpens. "James and Catherine should see exactly what they lost. And Elena, well, let's just say the Rothschilds could use a reminder of what real power looks like." The party began at sunset, with New York's elite filtering through security checkpoints that rivaled those at the White House. The triplets held court in a specially designed area, protected by both visible and invisible security measures. Atlas, already showing his father's commanding presence, charmed everyone with his fearless smile. Phoenix observed the proceedings with remarkable calm, accepting attention graciously but clearly preferring quiet moments. Aurora, true to her name, lit up the gathering with her infectious laugh and perfect baby curls. "They're magnificent," the governor commented to Lennox. "Perfect combinations of both parents." "They're their own people already," Lennox replied proudly, "just as they should be." The moment James and Catherine entered the party, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. They looked successful enough on the surface. James's firm had survived its relocation to New Jersey, though it never regained its Manhattan prestige. Catherine wore designer labels that seemed somehow less impressive in the midst of old money elegance. "Mrs. Orion," Catherine attempted a smile as they approached the receiving line. "The babies are beautiful." "Thank you," Lilibet replied graciously, feeling nothing but mild amusement at her former friend's obvious discomfort. "They're our greatest joy." James stood awkwardly, his eyes fixed on Aurora, who was happily playing with her father's watch. The baby girl looked up at him with Lilibet's eyes set in Lennox's determined features, a living reminder of what he'd thrown away. Elena Rothschild made her entrance later, perfectly coiffed and dripping with diamonds that seemed gaudy compared to the subtle wealth surrounding her. She made her way to the triplets' area, her smile not quite masking her bitterness. "They're everything we hoped for," Lennox said loudly enough for Elena to hear, his arm wrapped lovingly around Lilibet's waist. "Perfect little miracles." The party reached its peak as the sun set completely, the gardens illuminated by thousands of lights. A chamber orchestra played softly, while waiters circulated with champagne worth more than most people's monthly salary. "Speech!" someone called out, and the crowd turned expectantly toward Lennox. He stood, every inch the powerful patriarch, but his eyes were soft as they fell on his family. "A year ago, our lives changed forever with the arrival of three perfect souls. Atlas, Phoenix, and Aurora came into this world as Orions, yes, but more importantly, they came as themselves, unique, strong, and already showing the kind of character that makes a parent proud." He paused, his gaze finding Lilibet's. "None of this would be possible without my extraordinary wife, who turned a chance meeting in Vegas into the greatest love story I've ever known. She gave me not just three beautiful children, but a reason to be better, to love deeper, to see the world through artists' eyes." Victoria raised her glass, tears gleaming in her eyes. "To the next generation of Orions, and to the love that created them." As the toast echoed across the gathering, Lilibet felt her heart swell with emotion. Looking around at her perfect children, Atlas now predictably trying to escape his playpen, Phoenix carefully stacking blocks, and Aurora charming yet another group of admirers, she knew that every step of her journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be. James and Catherine slipped out early, their presence barely noticed in the celebration of genuine love and family. Elena lingered longer, watching the happy scene with increasingly obvious envy until Victoria smoothly engineered her departure. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the babies were asleep in their nursery, Lilibet and Lennox stood on their balcony overlooking the still-lit gardens. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Beyond happy," she replied, thinking of how far they'd come from that night in Vegas. "Though I still think 500 guests was a bit much for a first birthday party." "Wait until their second birthday," he teased. "Mother's already planning it." As if on cue, a baby monitor crackled with Aurora's soft coo, followed quickly by Atlas's more demanding cry and Phoenix's quiet gurgle. "Duty calls," Lilibet smiled, taking her husband's hand as they headed to the nursery. Sometimes, she thought as they tended to their precious triplets, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's creating a life so full of love that the past becomes nothing more than a stepping stone to your destiny. And her destiny, improbable as it had seemed that night in Vegas, was more beautiful than any she could have imagined. Chapter 11. Sweet Revenge. Thunder rolled across Manhattan as Lilibet stood in her private studio at the Orion Art Center, studying the massive triptych that would soon make art history. 3 interconnected canvases stretched from floor to ceiling, each panel telling part of their extraordinary journey: heartbreak, redemption, and triumph. "Mommy, look!" Aurora's voice rang out from her special corner, where she was creating her own version of her mother's work. At just over a year old, she already showed an uncanny ability to capture emotion in color, her tiny fingers wielding brushes with surprising grace. "It's beautiful, my love," Lilibet smiled, watching her daughter work. Through the glass partition, she could see Atlas scaling his climbing wall, while Phoenix sat surrounded by art books, each child a perfect blend of their parents' traits. Victoria announced, entering with her characteristic elegance, "The Met's curator is here." Along with representatives from the Louvre and the National Gallery, they're all bidding for the exhibition. Lilibet turned to her latest work, the centerpiece of what would become her Metropolitan Museum debut. The massive painting showed their family in the Hamptons garden, but it was more than a simple portrait. In it, she'd captured the exact moment when life had transformed from revenge to redemption. "Mrs. Orion," Harrison appeared with an unusually serious expression. "There's been a development. James Winchester has been arrested." The news rippled through the room like the thunder outside. Victoria immediately produced a tablet showing breaking news headlines. "Winchester Investment Group CEO indicted for fraud. Society wedding leads to criminal investigation." Apparently, Victoria's smile held a hint of satisfaction. His desperate attempts to maintain appearances after losing the Orion accounts led to some creative accounting. Catherine was seen leaving their townhouse with suitcases this morning. "The timing is rather perfect," Lennox observed, entering with both boys in his arms, "just before your Met exhibition." "That's not all," Harrison continued. "Elena Rothschild has been making calls. She's trying to secure an invitation to the opening night through various board members, and she's been spreading rumors about the legitimacy of your Vegas wedding." "Has she?" Victoria's expression turned predatory. "Well, we should ensure she has a front-row seat to witness exactly what she lost. Harrison, please see that Miss Rothschild receives a personal invitation, hand-delivered." Lennox set the boys down in their play area, Atlas immediately attempting to teach Phoenix a new climbing technique, while their brother observed with thoughtful consideration. The Rothschilds' latest attempt at a corporate takeover failed spectacularly, Lennox added, moving to wrap his arms around his wife. "Their stock is plummeting. Elena's European engagement ended rather publicly when her family couldn't provide the promised merger opportunities." "Look at them," Lilibet gestured to their children. Atlas had reached the top of his wall, letting out a victory cry that made Phoenix applaud while carefully marking his place in his art book. Aurora was creating what looked remarkably like an abstract expression of joy, her giggles filling the studio. This is real success, not corporate takeovers or society marriages, just pure love. A flash of lightning illuminated the studio, making the colors in Lilibet's triptych seem to come alive. The first panel showed a broken heart in Vegas. The second captured a love story that defied society's expectations, and the third showed their perfect family, proof that sometimes the best revenge is finding happiness beyond anything your enemies could imagine. "The Mets board has made their final offer," Victoria announced, reviewing messages on her phone. "They want to create a permanent wing, the Lilibet Orion Gallery of Contemporary Art. It would house not just this exhibition, but become a space for showcasing artists who embody your journey from adversity to triumph." "It's more than we imagined," Lennox murmured against her hair. "When we met in that Vegas bar, did you ever think we'd end up here? Creating a legacy of love instead of revenge." Lilibet turned in his arms. "Number. But that's what makes it perfect." Aurora chose that moment to proudly display her latest creation, a surprisingly sophisticated blend of colors that mimicked her mother's work. "Pretty," she declared, her brothers pausing their activities to admire their sister's art. "She has your talent," Victoria observed fondly. And your ability to see beauty where others see only pain. Harrison reappeared with more news. The RSVPs for the Met opening are overwhelming. Every major collector, critic, and society figure has confirmed. And, he paused significantly, Catherine Winchester has requested a private meeting. She's offering to tell her side of the story to any publication willing to listen. Desperate times, Victoria mused. Now that James faces prison and their assets are frozen, she's looking for a lifeline. No, Lilibet decided, watching her children play. Let her keep her story. We've written a better one. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the triptych like a spotlight from heaven. In that moment, Lilibet saw their story with perfect clarity, not as a tale of revenge, but as a testament to love's power to transform pain into beauty. The exhibition opens in 3 days, Victoria reminded them. Every detail has been arranged. The Met has never seen anything like what we have planned. Good. Lennox's voice held a note of fierce pride. Let them all see what real love looks like. Let them witness what happens when you choose happiness over bitterness, creation over destruction. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the storm had passed, Lilibet stood in her studio making final touches to the triptych. Each brushstroke carried meaning, the exact shade of Vegas neon that lit their first meeting, the golden light of their Hampton garden, where their children took their first steps, the perfect blue of the sky on the day they discovered they were having triplets. Ready to show the world our masterpiece? Lennox asked, joining her. Ready to show them that sometimes, she smiled, adding one final highlight to Aurora's painted curls. The best revenge is living a life so beautiful that those who hurt you become nothing more than a footnote in your happiness. As they headed to check on their sleeping children, thunder rumbled in the distance, nature's own drumroll for what was to come. In 3 days, the Met would unveil not just an exhibition, but a love story that would become legend. Victoria's words echoed in Lilibet's mind. Karma is best served not just with perfect timing, but with the kind of triumph that transforms enemies into unwitting supporters of your happiness. And as she fell asleep in Lennox's arms, she knew that the greatest artwork wasn't hanging in her studio. It was the life they'd created together, a masterpiece of love that had turned revenge into redemption. Chapter 12. Full Circle. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had never seen an exhibition opening quite like this. The entire museum had been closed to the public, transformed for one night into a showcase for love's renaissance. Lilibet Orion's triumphant new series celebrating family, redemption, and the power of true love. The grand staircase sparkled with thousands of white roses and crystal lights, while the great hall housed a collection of paintings that had the art world buzzing for months. At the center was Lilibet's masterpiece, a massive triptych showing the journey from heartbreak to happiness, with the final panel depicting a scene that brought tears to even the most hardened critic's eyes. "You've outdone yourself," Lennox whispered, his arm around his wife's waist as they stood before the central piece. The painting showed their family in the Hamptons' garden, the triplets playing in the golden light, Victoria watching with characteristic grace, and Lennox holding Lilibet as they watched their children. But it was more than just a family portrait. It was a testament to the power of fate and the beauty of second chances. Atlas, now a precocious toddler in a bespoke suit that matched his father's, tugged at Lennox's pant leg. "Up, Daddy! Want to see?" Lennox lifted their son, while Phoenix observed the artwork with his usual thoughtful expression, already showing signs of becoming a serious art critic at just over a year old. Aurora, resplendent in a tiny couture dress, was being doted on by Victoria, who had tears in her eyes as she looked at the painting. "Ladies and gentlemen," the museum's director called for attention, "tonight we celebrate not just artistic excellence, but the triumph of love over adversity. Mrs. Orion's exhibition, Love's Renaissance, will be permanently housed here at the Met, a gift from the Orion Foundation to ensure that future generations can witness this extraordinary journey. The applause was thunderous. Art critics who had once dismissed Lilibet as a society wife now praised her technical mastery and emotional depth. Collectors who had passed over her early works now bid astronomical sums for anything bearing her signature. Through the crowd, Lilibet spotted James and Catherine standing near the entrance, their presence a stark contrast to the success surrounding them. James looked aged beyond his years, the stress of his firm's bankruptcy evident in his face. Catherine clutched his arm, her designer dress a clearly desperate attempt to maintain appearances. But it was Elena Rothschild's arrival that caused the most subtle stir. Once the presumed future Mrs. Orion, she now stood alone, watching the family she could have had. The failed European engagement had left her with nothing but her family's diminishing influence and the bitter knowledge of what she'd lost. Mrs. Orion, Eleanor approached with forced politeness. Your work is impressive. Thank you, Lilibet replied graciously, secure in her happiness. Art, like love, has a way of finding its true path. Elena's gaze lingered on the triplets, Atlas now exploring the security features around the artwork with fascinating determination. Phoenix explaining the symbolism of the paintings to an amused museum trustee, and Aurora charming everyone with her perfect combination of Orion presence and artistic spirit. They're beautiful children, Elena managed, her voice tight. They're everything, Lennox replied simply, his arm tightening around Lilibet. Everything I never knew I needed until I met their mother. Victoria approached, expertly steering Eleanor away, while simultaneously summoning Harrison to escort James and Catherine to the exit. The message was clear. The past had no place in this celebration of the present. As the evening reached its peak, Lennox clinked his glass for attention. The crowd hushed, expecting a typical patron's speech. Instead, what they got was a love story. 2 years ago, he began, his eyes never leaving Lilibet's, I met a woman in a Vegas bar. She was running from betrayal. I was escaping an arranged marriage. What we found instead was something rare and precious, a love so pure it transformed both our lives. He gestured to the triptych behind them. This masterpiece shows our journey, but it's more than art. It's proof that sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you're meant to be. My wife didn't just give me 3 perfect children or create these extraordinary paintings. She showed me what real love looks like. Lilibet felt tears in her eyes as he continued. To those who doubted us, who thought a Vegas wedding couldn't last, look around. Look at our children, our family, this testament to love's power to transform pain into beauty. My wife took heartbreak and turned it into art. She took a chance meeting and turned it into destiny. He turned to face James and Catherine directly. To those who thought they were trading up, who believed love could be calculated like a business deal, thank you. Your betrayal led this extraordinary woman to me, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift. The room was silent, moved by the raw emotion in his voice. Even the triplets seemed to sense the moment's importance, Aurora reaching for her mother, while her brothers stood unusually still. My darling, Lennox addressed Lilibet directly now, you came to Vegas looking for escape. Instead, you found your destiny. These paintings show our past, but our future. That's the masterpiece we're still creating every day with every moment we share. He kissed her then, not caring about the cameras or the crowd. It was a kiss that spoke of passion, of gratitude, of a love that had only grown stronger with each challenge they faced. As the applause erupted around them, Lilibet looked at her family, her strong, beautiful children, her proud mother-in-law, and the husband who had turned a desperate escape into the greatest love story ever told. James and Catherine slipped out unnoticed, their presence as insignificant as their betrayal had become. Eleanor lingered at the edges, a ghost of what might have been, before finally accepting that some losses can never be recovered. Later that night, after the crowds had gone and the triplets were asleep in their nursery suite, Lilibet and Lennox stood on their penthouse terrace, overlooking the city that had witnessed their journey. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Beyond happy," she replied, thinking of how far they'd come from that Vegas bar. "Though I do have one question. Anything. If you could go back to that night knowing everything that would happen, would you still say yes when a heartbroken artist suggested getting married?" His answer was immediate and fierce. 1,000 times yes. In every lifetime, in every possible universe, I would choose you. Choose us. Choose this extraordinary life we've built together. As if in response, a baby's cry echoed through the monitor. Aurora, followed quickly by her brothers. Their parents smiled, recognizing the pattern. "Duty calls," Lilibet said, taking her husband's hand. "Our best adventure yet," he agreed. As they headed to the nursery, Lilibet thought about revenge and redemption, about pain transformed into beauty, about wrong turns that lead to right destinations. Her art might hang in the Met, but her greatest masterpiece was this life she'd created. A love story that began in desperation and bloomed into something more magical than any fairy tale. Sometimes she knew now the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living extraordinarily well, surrounded by a love so pure it transforms everything it touches. And their love story, improbable as it had begun, was still writing new chapters, each one more beautiful than the last. Subscribe if you liked.